Let's be honest, official history is boring. The real stories, the ones they leave out, are about the time a dead queen was crowned, an army invaded the same country by accident 3 times, and a war was decided by a single pot of soup. This isn't the history of kings and conquerors. This is the official chronicle of Europe's most magnificent failures and absolute absurdities. 1. Let's start in 18th century England, a time when medical science was, shall we say, a work in progress. Enter Mary Toft, a woman who pulled off one of the most audacious hoaxes in history by convincing the nation's top doctors she was giving birth to rabbits. Not a metaphor, actual rabbits. The story exploded, becoming a national obsession. Surgeons and physicians, including one sent by King George I himself, traveled to witness this medical miracle. For a short time, they were completely baffled. Was this a new frontier of human biology? Nope. Mary was just manually inserting parts of dead rabbits into her body and then delivering them. The eventual confession left the medical establishment utterly humiliated, proving that even brilliant minds can be led astray by a really weird story and a lack of common sense. 2. In 14th century Portugal, we find a story of love and revenge so extreme it sounds like something out of a gothic horror movie. Ines de Castro was the beloved mistress of Prince Pedro. When his father, the king, had her brutally murdered for political reasons, Pedro was consumed by grief and rage. Years later, upon ascending the throne, King Pedro I exacted his chilling revenge. He had Ines's corpse exhumed, dressed in the finest royal attire, and placed on the throne beside him for a full coronation ceremony. Then, in a truly macabre display of power, he forced every noble in his court to approach her decaying body, bow, and kiss her skeletal hand, acknowledging her as their one true queen. It was a terrifying, unforgettable message about love, loyalty, and the absolute insanity of a grieving king. 3. Switzerland is globally renowned for its neutrality and precision. Its army, however, seems to have a recurring issue with geography, specifically concerning its tiny neighbor, Liechtenstein. The Swiss military has accidentally invaded the principality on 3 separate occasions. The most recent, and arguably the funniest, was in 2007. A company of 171 fully armed Swiss soldiers, completely lost in the dark during a training exercise, marched a full 2 kilometers into Liechtenstein before realizing their mistake. Liechtenstein, a country with no army, didn't even notice the invasion. The whole affair was sorted out with an apologetic phone call from the Swiss, and Liechtenstein's response was essentially a diplomatic shrug, basically saying, "No worries, it happens." It's less of an international incident and more of a clumsy neighbor hopping the fence by mistake. 4. Every year, in a small Spanish village, a tradition takes place that would make any modern parent's blood run cold. It's called El Colacho, but it's more famously known as the Baby Jumping Festival. And yes, it is exactly what it sounds like. Babies born over the past year are laid on mattresses in the middle of the street. Then, men dressed as devils in garish yellow and red costumes come running and literally leap over the rows of infants. This bizarre ritual dates back to the 1600s and is believed to cleanse the babies of original sin, with the devil absorbing it as he flies over them. It's a breathtaking, terrifying, and utterly unique spectacle that combines faith, tradition, and a level of risk that is simply unthinkable anywhere else in the modern world. 5. For over 200 years, Paris, the undisputed capital of world fashion, had a law that made it technically illegal for women to wear trousers. Enacted in 1799, the ordinance required women to seek formal permission from the police if they wished to dress like a man. This wasn't about fashion. It was a measure to keep women out of certain jobs and roles in society. Of course, Parisian women defiantly ignored this absurd rule for generations. But the truly baffling part is that this law remained on the books, gathering dust, but still legally valid, until it was officially struck down in 2013. That's right, 2013. For 2 centuries, every woman walking down the Champs-Élysées in a pair of jeans was, in the eyes of an ancient law, a fashion-forward criminal. 6. When Liechtenstein dispatched its military during the Austro-Prussian War in 1866, it achieved a result no other army in history can claim. The country sent out a modest force of 80 soldiers. Their mission was to defend a mountain pass, a task they performed diligently without ever seeing a single moment of combat. When the war concluded, the 80 men packed their gear and marched home. Upon their return, however, the official headcount revealed a shocking number. 81 soldiers were present. It turned out that during their deployment, they had befriended an Italian liaison officer, who simply decided he liked them so much he'd come home with them. Liechtenstein went to war with 80 men and returned with 81, suffering 0 casualties and gaining a new friend. An absolute victory. 7. In 1784, a conflict known as the Kettle War proved that sometimes the difference between victory and defeat is lunch. The powerful Austrian Empire sent a naval fleet to confront the Dutch. The stage was set for a major battle. As the imposing Austrian flagship sailed forward, a single Dutch ship, the Dolphin, fired precisely 1 cannonball. Just 1. That single shot soared through the air and, with unbelievable accuracy, smashed directly into the massive kettle of soup cooking on the Austrian ship's deck, showering the sailors in their own dinner. The Austrian crew was so utterly shocked, demoralized, and presumably hungry at this targeted culinary attack that they immediately surrendered. The entire war was won by the Dutch with a single, perfectly aimed, soup-destroying projectile. 8. While other cultures offer words for cozy contentment, Finland has a term that captures a more realistic form of relaxation: kalsarikennet. This glorious national concept translates to drinking at home, alone, in your underwear, with no intention of going out. It's not a sign of a bad day. It's a celebrated and legitimate form of self-care, an ode to the simple joy of having absolutely no plans. This isn't just some underground slang either. The Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs deemed this concept so essential to their national identity that they immortalized it as one of the country's official emojis, placing it alongside cultural staples like the sauna. It's a government-endorsed celebration of introverted bliss that the rest of the world has been practicing for years without a name for it. 9. The Monte Carlo Casino in Monaco is the absolute pinnacle of glamour and high-stakes gambling, a place synonymous with James Bond and unimaginable wealth. Yet, it operates on one of the most ironic rules in the world. The very citizens of Monaco are forbidden from gambling there. That's right. The people whose country is almost entirely funded by the casino are not allowed to set foot inside to place a bet. This law was put in place by Prince Charles III back in the 19th century. His reasoning was surprisingly pragmatic. The casino was a business designed to attract money from wealthy foreigners, not to bankrupt his own subjects. So, while the world's rich and famous come to Monaco to lose their fortunes, the locals are safely on the outside, counting the profits. It's the ultimate case of don't get high on your own supply. 10. Milan is a city known for high fashion, serious business, and an air of sophisticated cool. Which makes it all the more hilarious that for centuries, it had a law on the books that technically required its citizens to smile at all times. This wasn't a friendly suggestion, it was a legal requirement. According to this old regulation, which dates back to the Austro-Hungarian era, a frown could genuinely land you a fine. The only acceptable excuses for not smiling were attending a funeral or visiting a hospital. For any other occasion, you were expected to maintain a look of pleasant cheerfulness. While the law is no longer enforced, just imagine the pressure of having a bad day and trying to avoid the frown police. It's a beautifully absurd attempt to legislate happiness in one of Europe's most stylishly serious cities. 11. Imagine a major European capital city completely devoid of the sound of barking dogs. For most of the 20th century, that was the strange reality in Reykjavik, Iceland. From 1924 all the way up to 1984, dogs were completely banned within the city limits. This wasn't because Icelanders were secretly cat people. It was a drastic public health measure. In the late 19th century, a dangerous parasitic tapeworm spread from dogs to humans, causing a fatal illness called hydatid disease. The ban was an attempt to eradicate it completely. So for 60 years, man's best friend was essentially an illegal resident in the capital. The ban was finally lifted in 1984, but with strict licensing and health requirements, allowing dogs to finally and legally return to the streets of Reykjavik after a very long walk in the wilderness. 12. Portugal boasts some of Europe's most beautiful beaches, perfect for swimming, surfing, and soaking up the sun. But if you feel a certain call of nature while in the water, you'd better resist. That's because it is technically illegal to urinate in the ocean in Portugal. This law, aimed at maintaining public hygiene and coastal cleanliness, presents a rather significant enforcement challenge. One has to wonder how exactly this is policed. Are there undercover officers treading water? Do they use some sort of advanced detection technology? Of course, the law is largely symbolic, a statement of principle rather than a practical rule. Still, it remains on the books as a hilarious reminder that while you can be one with the ocean, there are certain contributions you are legally forbidden from making to it. 13. Finland seems to have a monopoly on bizarre national pastimes, and the wife-carrying world championship might be the greatest of them all. This isn't a joke. It's a fiercely competitive international sport. Every year, men from around the globe descend on the village of Sonkajärvi to hoist their wives, or neighbors, the rules are flexible, over their shoulders and tackle a grueling 253-meter obstacle course. The course includes sand, fences, and a water pit. The prize? The winning couple receives the wife's weight in beer. The sport's origin is supposedly rooted in the dark legend of a 19th-century brigand who stole women from neighboring villages by carrying them off on his back. Only Finland could transform a history of banditry into a celebrated sport fueled by athleticism and beer. 14. Long before Hollywood and Gothic novels, the original vampire panic that swept across Europe didn't start in Transylvania, but in Serbia. In the early 18th century, after the region came under Austrian rule, officials began documenting strange local traditions of the dead rising from their graves to torment the living. Cases like those of Petar Blagojevich and Arnold Paule were recorded in meticulous bureaucratic detail by horrified Austrian military surgeons. These weren't folk tales, they were official government reports, complete with exhumations and descriptions of corpses that were deemed undecayed. These reports, with their official stamps and medical jargon, spread like wildfire across Western Europe, introducing the Serbian word vampire to the world and giving the legend a veneer of scientific credibility that sparked a continent-wide obsession. 15. When faced with an ultimatum from a powerful enemy, most would choose diplomacy or surrender. The Zaporozhian Cossacks of Ukraine chose weaponized sarcasm. In the 17th century, when the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed IV demanded their submission, the Cossacks gathered together and composed what might be the most gloriously insulting letter in diplomatic history. Instead of bowing to his authority, they addressed him with a torrent of creative abuse, calling him the Babylonian scullion, brewer of Jerusalem, goat herder of Alexandria, and other far less repeatable titles. The legendary letter, immortalized in a famous painting, is a masterpiece of defiance, proving that you don't always need an army to fight back. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is a shared vocabulary of truly epic insults. 16. If you travel through Albania today, you'll see the countryside dotted with thousands of strange, concrete domes resembling giant gray mushrooms. These are the remnants of one of the most paranoid architectural projects in history. During his brutal 40-year rule, the communist dictator Enver Hoxha became obsessed with the idea of a foreign invasion from literally anyone and everyone. His solution was to launch a massive bunkerization program, building an estimated 173,000 concrete bunkers across the tiny nation. There was one for every 11 citizens. These indestructible pillboxes were placed on beaches, in mountains, in cities, and on playgrounds, but were never used for their intended purpose. Today, they stand as a surreal monument to a dictator's paranoia, creatively repurposed by modern Albanians into cafes, sheds, and even hostels. 17. While most of the world celebrates the new year with fireworks and champagne, parts of rural Moldova and Romania embrace a tradition that is far more primal and furry. It's called Ursul, or the bear dance. This isn't a cute mascot performance. It involves groups of people dressing in real, often massive, bearskins, complete with a head and parading from house to house. Accompanied by drummers and singers, these bears perform a ritualistic dance meant to chase away the evil spirits of the past year and bring good fortune for the new one. It's a loud, slightly terrifying, and deeply pagan spectacle that has survived centuries of change. Seeing a dozen towering, dancing bears on your doorstep on New Year's Eve is a uniquely unsettling way to ensure you have a prosperous year ahead. 18. Many armies have had animal mascots, but the Polish army during World War II had a soldier who just happened to be a bear. His name was Wojtek. As a cub, he was adopted by soldiers of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company and quickly became an official member of the unit. He didn't just boost morale, he was a working soldier. Wojtek learned to carry heavy crates of ammunition, especially during the intense Battle of Monte Cassino, never dropping a single one. In recognition of his service, he was promoted to the rank of corporal. After the war, Corporal Wojtek retired to the Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland, where he lived out his days, often visited by his former Polish comrades who would toss him cigarettes, his favorite treat. It's the ultimate story of camaraderie, proving that in the heat of battle, your strongest brother in arms might just be a bear. 19. In the 18th century, King Gustav III of Sweden was so convinced that coffee was a deadly poison that he decided to prove it with a scientific experiment. He took two identical twins who were condemned to death and commuted their sentences to life imprisonment on one condition. One twin had to drink 3 large pots of coffee every day, while the other had to drink 3 large pots of tea. The king assigned 2 doctors to oversee the experiment and eagerly awaited the results, certain the coffee drinker would perish first. The outcome was a spectacular failure for the king's hypothesis. First, both doctors died. Then, King Gustav himself was assassinated. Finally, years later, the tea-drinking twin died at the ripe old age of 83. The coffee-drinking twin outlived them all. 20. The list of reasons for starting a war is long and varied, but few are as utterly ridiculous as the one that sparked the War of the Cow in 13th century Belgium. The conflict began when a peasant from one territory stole a single cow from a neighboring one. Instead of resolving this minor theft with a simple fine, the dispute escalated. And escalated. And escalated. Soon, a coalition of feudal lords was involved, leading to a full-blown war that raged for several years. By the time it was over, an estimated 15,000 people were dead, numerous villages had been burned to the ground, and the entire region was devastated. All because of one stolen bovine. It stands as perhaps the most extreme example in history of the phrase, raising the stakes, proving that no dispute is too petty to start a catastrophic war. 21. The Catholic Church experienced what can only be described as a severe administrative crisis in the late 14th century, known as the Western Schism. It started with 2 men claiming to be the one true pope, one in Rome and one in Avignon, France. Both had been elected by cardinals, and both refused to step down. To solve the problem, a council was convened to depose both of them and elect a new, single pope. The result? The first 2 popes refused to acknowledge the council's authority, and now there were 3 men, all claiming to be the pope. In a move of peak medieval bureaucracy, each of the 3 popes then proceeded to excommunicate the other 2. For a brief, chaotic period, the entire Catholic world was led by 3 rival leaders who had all officially kicked each other out of the church. 22. Declaring war is a serious business, and so is declaring peace. But sometimes, in the mountain of paperwork that follows a major conflict, a small country can get overlooked. This is exactly what happened to the tiny principality of Andorra after World War I. Andorra had officially declared war on Germany, but since its army was basically non-existent, it didn't participate in any fighting. When the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919, officially ending the war, someone simply forgot to include Andorra's name on the document. Technically, this meant that for the next 2 decades, the small mountain nation remained in a formal state of war with Germany. This bizarre diplomatic oversight was finally corrected, and peace was officially declared in 1958, long after World War II had come and gone. 23. Tucked away in the heart of Vilnius, Lithuania, is a neighborhood that decided to take bohemian living to the next level. It's called the Republic of Uzupis. In 1997, the residents, mostly artists and writers, playfully declared their independence from the rest of Lithuania. They weren't kidding. The republic has its own flag, its own president, a cabinet of ministers, and an army consisting of about 12 people. But the centerpiece of Uzupis is its constitution, which is displayed in over 20 languages on a public wall. Its articles include profound rights like, everyone has the right to be happy, more ambiguous ones like, everyone has the right to be unhappy, and the wonderfully bizarre, a dog has the right to be a dog. It's a living, breathing work of art masquerading as a tiny, eccentric country. 24. In most countries, escaping from prison is a serious crime that will add significant time to your sentence. In Germany, however, things are a little different. Under German law, the act of escaping from prison is not, in itself, illegal. The legal system recognizes that the desire for freedom is a basic and powerful human instinct, and therefore, it doesn't punish the prisoner for the act of escape itself. Now, this doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. Any crimes committed during the escape, like assault, property damage, or theft, are prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But if a prisoner manages to escape without breaking any other laws, say, by simply finding an unlocked door, they won't face additional prison time for the escape. It's a fascinating legal loophole based on a very philosophical view of human nature. 25. In the Norwegian town of Longyearbyen, one of the world's northernmost settlements, there are many rules designed for survival in the harsh Arctic environment. But the most famous one is by far the strangest. It is forbidden to die there. This isn't a quest for immortality, it's a practical response to the frigid ground. The town is built on a thick layer of permafrost, which means that buried bodies never decompose. Scientists discovered this when they exhumed the bodies of miners who died in the 1918 flu pandemic and found the virus was still perfectly preserved within them. To prevent the preservation and potential future outbreak of diseases, the town's small cemetery stopped accepting new burials decades ago. Anyone who is terminally ill is flown to the Norwegian mainland to live out their final days, making death in Longyearbyen an illegal and very cold case. 26. During the darkest days of the American Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln received an unexpected letter of support from one of the world's smallest and oldest republics, San Marino. The leaders of the tiny landlocked nation in the middle of Italy wrote to Lincoln to express their solidarity with the Union's cause. Deeply moved by this gesture from a country founded on the principles of liberty, Lincoln wrote back a heartfelt letter. In it, he praised their enduring republic, and, as a sign of friendship, the Council of San Marino offered him honorary citizenship. Lincoln accepted, making him not only the 16th President of the United States, but also an official citizen of San Marino. It's a little-known and heartwarming footnote in history, a diplomatic pen-pal relationship between a global superpower in crisis and a microstate that never lost its faith in freedom. 27. In Hungary, the day after Easter Sunday is known as Laxalkodas, or Watering Monday, a folk tradition that is equal parts charming and slightly mischievous. On this day, boys and men travel from house to house visiting female friends and relatives. After reciting a short, often humorous poem, they proceed to water the women, which originally meant dousing them with a bucket of cold water. The act was a pre-Christian fertility ritual meant to ensure the women would be healthy and beautiful. In modern times, the buckets have mostly been replaced by squirts of perfume or cologne, which is arguably more pleasant. In return for not being soaked in water, the women reward the men with beautifully painted eggs, pastries, and sometimes a shot of palinka, the local fruit brandy. It's a festive, flirtatious, and very damp way to celebrate spring. 28. Cyprus is often called the Isle of Love, but it could just as easily be called the Isle of Cats. Feline companions are everywhere, and their story is tied to the very foundation of the island's monastic life. According to legend, in the 4th century, Saint Helena, the mother of Emperor Constantine, founded a monastery in Cyprus. However, the island was overrun with poisonous snakes, making life there perilous. Her solution was a masterclass in biological pest control. She had hundreds, some say thousands, of cats shipped in from Egypt and Palestine. The cats were set loose to hunt the snakes, and a monastery, now known as St. Nicholas of the Cats, was established to care for the feline army. To this day, the massive cat population on Cyprus is seen as a living legacy of this ancient and very furry solution to a slithering problem. 29. In the 17th century, a Belarusian scholar, poet, and cleric named Simeon of Polotsk was a man far ahead of his time. As a tutor to the children of the Russian Tsar, he was a key figure in bringing Western European Enlightenment ideas to the region. He proposed the creation of a grand academy of sciences, a hub for learning and innovation. The curriculum he outlined was ambitious, covering everything from theology and languages to astronomy. But tucked away among these serious subjects was one truly revolutionary proposal: a faculty dedicated to the science of laughter. Simeon believed that humor and comedy were not just frivolous diversions, but essential subjects worthy of academic study. Sadly, his visionary academy was never fully realized, robbing the world of what would have surely been the most entertaining university department in history. 30. The Tales of Baron Munchausen, a nobleman who rides cannonballs, travels to the moon, and pulls himself out of a swamp by his own hair, are legendary works of fantasy. But the Baron himself was a very real person. Hieronymus Karl Friedrich, Freiherr von Munchausen, was an 18th-century German aristocrat who was born in Bodenwerder but spent much of his military career serving in the Russian Empire, stationed in what is now Latvia. After retiring to his estate, he became famous for telling outrageously exaggerated stories about his military adventures to his dinner guests. A German writer anonymously collected and embellished these tall tales, turning the real-life Baron into an international symbol of ludicrous exaggeration. The actual Baron was reportedly not amused by his newfound literary fame as the world's greatest liar. 31. Luxembourg is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but it maintains its wealth through careful financial planning. This pragmatism once extended to its entire air force. For a time, the Luxembourg armed forces consisted of a small army and a modest air wing, which at one point included just 2 military patrol aircraft. However, the government soon realized that the cost of operating, maintaining, and housing these 2 planes was simply too expensive for such a small nation. So, in a move of ultimate fiscal responsibility, they just sold them. The 2 planes were sold off to a private airline, effectively dissolving the country's combat air power overnight. It's a hilarious example of a nation looking at its military budget, shrugging, and deciding it would rather have the money. 32. In 1798, a young and ambitious general named Napoleon Bonaparte set his sights on the strategic island of Malta, which was then controlled by the legendary Knights of St. John. A direct assault on the island's formidable fortifications would have been a long and bloody affair. So Napoleon chose a different tactic: politeness. He sailed his massive fleet into the Grand Harbor and simply asked the knights for permission to dock and take on fresh water. The Grand Master of the Knights, wary of Napoleon's intentions but bound by rules of hospitality, agreed to let only a few ships in at a time. This was the opening Napoleon needed. Once inside the harbor, his soldiers quickly turned on their hosts, and with minimal resistance, the French captured the entire island without a single major battle, proving that sometimes the easiest way to conquer a fortress is to knock on the front door and ask nicely. 33. On the night of January 6, 1839, Ireland was battered by a storm so violent and otherworldly that it became etched in the national psyche as Wisha na Gawite Muir, or the Night of the Big Wind. This wasn't just a bad storm, it was a meteorological event of apocalyptic proportions. A hurricane-force tempest roared across the entire island, flattening a huge percentage of the houses in the country, from stone buildings in Dublin to mud cabins in the west. The wind was so loud that people reported it sounded like shrieking armies. It sent fish flying out of rivers and scattered haystacks for miles, leaving the countryside looking like it had been combed by a giant. For a deeply religious population, this wasn't just weather. It was a sign. Many were convinced that the day of judgment had finally arrived, a belief only strengthened when the storm finally, eerily, died down at dawn. So it's clear the past was a chaotic mess, run by some truly questionable decision-makers. We've only scratched the surface of this continent-wide circus of absurdity. Now, we're turning it over to you. We know we missed some gems. What is the single most bizarre historical fact from your corner of the world that we were completely blind to overlook? The comments are now the official archive of what should have been number 34. If you enjoyed this dive into historical madness, destroy that like button and subscribe for more.